The Metta Sutta again. So we finished last night with Na chakudam samachare kinchi Vayena vinupare upawadeum. So one would not do even the slightest thing that others who are wise would speak against. This is, of course, Hiri Ottappa, twin guardians of the world, so called. It's actually more simply Ottappa, being careful so that what if somebody I respected saw me doing this? What would they think? So Hiri Ottappa is twofold. It is self-respect. Hiri, that aspect of the kind of fear of wrongdoing. Another word for it is conscience. Knowing what's right and wrong and thinking, I don't want to go there. Ottappa is the protection in case Hiri is not so strong. If we really want to do that anyway, but what would happen if? These two are called the twin guardians of the world because they're the brakes on the worst side of ourselves. They're the brakes on those habits that we might have that might be quite strong, actually. And to be really careful about the precepts as a result. A lot of the things that are wrong in the world right now are wrong because a lot of people don't have Hiri Ottappa, but we do. So these keep us safe. And that concludes that kind of stamp. It's like, okay, follow the precepts purely as best as you can. And now the sutta makes this transition into what is explicitly about metta. So kemino wa sukino hontu. Kema is a really common monastic name, actually, or the root of a really common monastic name. Kema basically means peace. Sukha is sweetness. It's also happiness. So kemino, sukino, these are just the plural nominative of those nouns. May they be happy. It's about many beings. It's not just one person. And people translate this in various ways, but the literal translation is, may they be happy and peaceful. And then that sukha part is emphasized in the next sentence, where it says, Sabbe sata bhavantu sukhitata. So sabbe, all, sata beings, may all beings, bhavantu, may they live. And then sukhi, there's that root again, sukhitata, may they abide happily. So this is a basic metta wish. I think of it as kind of the Buddha's. I used to be a scientist, so at the first part of a scientific paper you have the abstract, that is, the summary of everything. I think of this as the Buddha's abstract. And after this abstract, he goes into more detail. So this basic wish is just so beautiful, Sukhino wa kemino hontu sabbe sata bhavantu sukhitata. May all beings abide happily. Be safe and happy, abide easily in themselves. And that's all we get in terms of a basic wish in this sutta. It's repeated twice by way of emphasis. So at the beginning of this next two verses and at the end. And I like that. It's like bookends. Bookends, the ends of a bookshelf that keep the books up. But this basic wish, of course, can be expanded infinite numbers of ways. So in this Mahasi Metta chanting, that actually Mahasi Sayadaw did not compose this Pali. It came from the Patisambhidamagga. The Patisambhidamagga is late canonical. It's one of the suttas, but it's very late Pali. So embedded in this, after we go through all the sabbes, all the male beings, all the creatures, all etc., we come to these four phrases that are the four classic metta phrases. Awara hontu, abhyapaja hontu, anika hontu, sukhi ata nam pariharantu. So you see them there in the Mahasi Metta chant. These are the basic metta phrases. And when you learn the metta practice traditionally in Burma, not from the teacher that I've been studying with in the last, long time now, almost 20 years, but like U Pandita, he would teach the basic metta practice using these Pali phrases. So, may my dear friend, awera hontu, abhyapaja hontu, aniga hontu, sukhiyata nam pariharantu. You just repeat that phrase. That's your metta phrase. And what's interesting to me is they have a real karuna flavor to them. Because if you look at the first three, awero, abhyapaja, anigo, those first three words of each of the first lines, that starts with A. So A in Pali is one way of saying the opposite. So dosa, adosa, vera, avera. So when you put the A in front of something, it means it's a negative. So vera, V-E-R-A, is enmity. Enmity or hatred, or even malevolence, really strong hatred. Avero hontu, may they be free from hatred. Likewise for the others in that list of phrases. So free from hatred, free from mental suffering, free from physical suffering. And then that last phrase is has much more of a specific metta phrase because it doesn't reference suffering. Sukhiyatanam pariharantu. So these phrases, there's no way of telling, of course, because none of us were there. Well, maybe we were, but we don't remember. But in the Visuddhimagga, he echoes these very same phrases in a slightly simplified form. In the Visuddhimagga, the Pali, for example, instead of awero hontu, abhyapaja hontu, anigo hontu, he goes awero, abhyapaja, anigo, sukhiyatanam. He strings all that together into one simple phrase. So instead of, may they be free from mental suffering, may they be free from physical suffering, etc. It's like mental, physical suffering, hatred, may they be free from hatred, mental suffering, physical suffering, and may they live happily. It's more like what we do in our English phrase, simplifying it so it's not 4 separate sentences. And in fact, the simplification of the phrase that Buddhaghosa has in the Visuddhimagga is very useful for the development of concentration. And Sayadaw U Indaka, my metta teacher in Burma, takes this another step further, and this is how I share this. He says, don't use the Pali. Use a simple phrase in your native language, whatever you were born into, if you speak multiple languages. And short is good. It is really good. In Burmese, he just says, Chanma Chanda Jabe, Chanma Chanda Baze, which means, may you be well and happy. The shorter the phrase, and in your own language, the harder it is to lose it when the concentration, to lose track of it when the concentration begins to deepen. So a number of you have reported, I got to this place and I couldn't even remember the phrase. That's what concentration does. Especially if you have a longer phrase. You can get to the end of one phrase and go, where was I now? You totally lose track. So may you be well and happy. It's a very simple, short phrase. And right about now, for many of you, as the concentration begins to deepen, that phrase can get even shorter. I've said this to a number of people in the individual meetings. If the concentration is getting really deep and the words, you have this connection with the metta phrase and with the metta intention, and the words are just feeling like they're getting in the way of particularly the metta. It's possible to say, for example, may my dear friend be well, happy, and peaceful. Instead of that, to say, dear friend, well, happy, peaceful. And to keep using that phrase as the concentration deepens in order to keep the metta and the concentration deepening together, rather than going off the deep end into concentration without the metta. So to keep using the phrase to keep that connection with the metta wish, because concentration, it feels like it's this giant magnet. It has this gravitational pull. And it's very pleasant, and we can go straight into it and totally lose that connection with the metta. So simplifying the phrase is very helpful in allowing us to continue cultivating metta, but not getting in the way. So only one more thing to say about the phrase. Sometimes people ask, can I say, may you be well, happy, and peaceful? As though we're right in front of the other person and having a conversation with them, or, connecting directly with them. And on the surface, it seems like the connection is easier that way. But I'd advise against doing that, because what comes in is mana, that sense of me and you and separateness. And oddly, when you use somebody's name, that doesn't happen so much. Try it for yourself and see. See for yourself. But I've certainly found for myself it makes a big difference. It's so interesting to feel the resonance difference when using a couple of different words. It really changes the flavor of the whole phrase. So the metta phrase. And for whom? Well, in that second line, Sabbe Sata Bhavantu Sukhitata. Sabbe Sata, all beings. And yes, who? All beings. Who are all beings? Whatever living beings there are without exception is that first line of the next verse. So, any living beings whatsoever. Metta, pure metta, as I've said, has no boundary, no barriers. It's without exception. I like that phrase, because we can't say whatever living beings there are, except for, we just can't say that. Any living being, even the ones we can't stand, even the ones we're afraid of, even the ones that are making awful trouble in the world, them too. There's a particular form of mana, of conceit, that comes in with the metta practice that relates to the different categories of beings we use in the practice. So we get to, at first, the benefactor, and we think, they don't need my metta. Or we get to the difficult category today, and really difficult people, and we think, I don't want to send them metta. They don't deserve my metta. And you see the mana embedded in those statements. Oh, I'm so much less than my benefactor, I can't send them metta. I'm so much better than that horrible politician over there. No, they don't deserve my metta. But that's not what metta's about. Because beings are alive, because they are living beings, they deserve metta. Basta. It's that quality that is completely separate from how that person is in the world, whether they're good people, bad people, good beings, bad beings, whether we like them or not, without exception. And then in the sutta, it goes into both pairs of opposites and continuums. So the first one is actually quite interesting, whether they be weak or strong. Another translation of those words are frail or firm. Firm, solid. But I was looking and reading in the Pali, and Sujato speaks of movable and immovable, mobile and immobile. And I really like this because I happen to think plants are living beings. This is my biological upbringing. And if you ask the Sayadaws in Burma, well, can I radiate metta to trees? They go, they're not alive. No, don't bother. Yeah, with respect, I disagree. So this translation of movable and immovable opens the door to that. And there's actually some very good science coming out of Italy studying consciousness in plants. So I come out of my door these days to be confronted by these two beautiful beings, those two linden trees down there. And as far as I'm concerned, they're some of the best metta objects around. Yesterday, quite frankly, they took my breath away. The sun was shining and the leaves were kind of quivering. And it's like, ay, may you be happy. So I would say yes, if you relate to plants that way, please feel free to send them metta. And then the next line is all about size, whether it's tall or big, medium, short or small. That whole continuum from really tiny to huge. Yeah, so those two lines are all about, from very, very small to very, very big. Everything in between, that whole continuum. Extending that to whether we can see them or not in the next line. And this applies to whether we can see them because they're super small or whether they're far away or hidden to us. Any reason something is invisible, whether it's distance or size or obscurity, it doesn't matter. Whether we can see it or not, it doesn't matter. Any being. And combined with the next line, near and far away, this gives a hint of how we deal with radiating metta to beings that are living very far away that we will never see. And what this speaks to is that the boundlessness of metta does not depend on a story. Not any story, even the story of perception, or being able to put a name onto someone. It's enough to know there are beings out there, and then to radiate metta means whatever living beings there may be, and then the metta just goes out by itself. We don't have to have anything to hang it on. It really doesn't matter whether it's for the person sitting next to us or somebody in another galaxy. That's the boundlessness of metta. It's really quite profound. And then the last line in terms of groups is more about time. It literally means whether born now, already born, or seeking rebirth. So there are long discussions in this about, well, does this mean in Theravada does that refer to some sort of weird Theravada Bardo realm? I take it much more simply, meaning anyone stuck in samsara who is still seeking the next moment of rebirth. That counts. So with the repetition of that metta phrase, the Buddha closes this first section. And there's an abrupt change in gear, a gear change, it's like, suddenly we're talking about the opposite of metta. And I really love the way the Buddha does this in this sutta. He does this a couple of times. The sutta, it's like it breathes in and it breathes out, and it breathes in and it breathes out. So the first thing the Buddha gives us is the information about the metta, basic metta phrase and the beings that we need to radiate the metta for. And then acknowledging challenges, it's like, this is what metta is not. So it goes from metta to dosa, and then it switches back to speak very clearly about the tender quality of metta. And then it goes back again to dosa. So when you look at this, it's lovely because the Buddha's saying, this is metta, and then it's though he's saying, remember, no dosa. And then again he says, this is the quality of metta, and he says, remember, no dosa. Like, don't forget. So that first verse that starts with na paro param, that whole verse is about the manifestations of dosa. And the Buddha's saying, let's not do this anymore. And especially, the summary at the end of that verse, just don't wish suffering on other people. And this is a very clear statement about the far enemy of metta. And also, that last line, one would not wish suffering on others, that's the far enemy of compassion, which is cruelty. So the Buddha is saying these manifestations of ill will and cruelty, no, just no. And then he goes into detail about what metta is, the tenderness of metta, and really the ferocity of metta. Just as a mother would watch over her only child, would give her life for her only child. And people do this every day, actually, in this world. Sad though that is. There are plenty of examples if you read the news of this happening. This quality of fierce tenderness is the paradox of metta. I never met Mahasi Sayadaw, but my teacher U Pandita had this in large amounts of this fierce tenderness. It speaks to that difference between anger and discernment. And actually, Donatella, I want to thank you for asking me that question this afternoon, because it kind of crystallized something for me. Because the ferocity of metta isn't passive, it's discernment. And sometimes with discernment, we speak and act really decisively, with clarity, with energy, with courage. We take the energy that can go into anger, but instead use it in a different way. There's a very famous story that Sharon Salzberg tells about going to visit Deepa Ma in Calcutta, and when she was in the rickshaw, somebody tried to steal her purse. And when she got to Deepa Ma and told her this story, Deepa Ma said, "Well, you should have hit him over the head with your umbrella with all the metta in your heart." It's a little shocking, but it's not a joke. And from this place of compassion and wanting to be very clear, U Pandita used to say things that made people terrified of him. He'd say things like, "Don't waste my time." Meaning, you're not practicing sincerely. And that direct statement, it woke a lot of people up. So anger transformed into discernment and action can really do good in the world. I was telling Donatella a story of U Pandita saying to me, "Not good enough." But he was compassionate to ask another question right after that. He had asked me what I had noticed when I put on my robes in the morning. And I hadn't been very mindful. So I didn't have much to report. And then he said, "Well, what did you notice when you washed your face last time?" So I said, I noticed blah, 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 in the same kind of depth as I had reported my formal sitting practice. And then he said, "Good. Now, do that every waking moment." I think I must have gone something, I must have just given him a look. But what was very clear from that short exchange was there was that direct, the sword, and then there was the compassion saying, "Do that every waking moment, and I wouldn't ask you unless I knew you could do it." I walked out of there so inspired. It totally changed my practice. I didn't think I could do it, but I knew he had the discernment to know that I could. Those statements were not mushy. They weren't sweet. They were very, very direct. So, speech that is coming from a place of discernment can be very useful. Even very direct, blunt speech. So the energy of anger, when we channel it into discernment as opposed to just venting, can be really useful in the world. So that fierce tenderness of metta, as a mother protects her child, developed towards all living beings, that's huge. That's the boundlessness of metta. And here's the second example of a repeated line. In this case, manasam bhavaye aparimanam. The Buddha didn't repeat things because he was senile. He repeated them because he wanted to emphasize that. Unbounded towards all living beings, without any barriers whatsoever. If you take these two sentences that are repeated twice, this is also a beautiful summary of this whole sutta. Sabbe sata bhavantu sukhitata, up in the third and fifth verses. And then manasam bhavaye aparimanam here. You can string them together. In English, may all beings be happy in themselves, unbounded towards all living creatures. May all beings be happy. And the repetition of both these phrases, I think, is really important. And by way of emphasis, after the second time he repeats manasam bhavaye aparimanam, he goes again into this all the way around, above, below, and all around. At udam ado cha tiriyancha. Third to the last verse, the end. And then again, the opposite, the very end of that third to the last verse, is the Buddha saying, remember, no dosa, no holding back, no loathing, no enemies. Asambadam awaram asapatam. So here again we have that back and forth. The Buddha saying, unbounded towards everybody, and remember, no dosa. Don't forget, no dosa. And the way he goes back and forth like this, these two times, I think really speaks to his understanding of how challenging this is. And embedded in this teaching is that affirmation about all of us, that in spite of those challenges, it is possible to do this. The Buddha doesn't give this nice, lovely metta teaching without mentioning that the world is a hard place to live in sometimes. He explicitly acknowledges that. And really, with that discernment, it's like as though he is saying, the world is the way it is. We have to choose whether to follow metta or to follow dosa. That sense of every waking moment that U Pandita was talking about is what comes next. Titam charam nisinowa, sayanowa, etc. Sitting or standing, walking, sitting, and lying down. As long as you are not sleepy, you should maintain this mindfulness, is the basic translation of those lines. I really like this. This word order is very interesting because I tend to think sitting, walking, standing, lying down. Because, well, we do sitting meditation, right? That's the most important thing, right? We all have this bias. And then there's walking meditation. That's meditation too. Standing and lying down, those are just things we do if we can't really meditate. I'm being sarcastic. I hope you understand. But the Buddha first says standing, then walking, then sitting, then lying down. They're all equal. They are all equal. They really are. As long as you're not sleepy, the next line says, maintain this mindfulness. And I say mindfulness on purpose. Because look at that line. It says, etam satim aditya. You see the word right in the middle? Sati. There it is. And in this case, it's not like the sati of vipassana. It's the sati, the mindfulness of remembering. Recollection is another English word that sometimes gets used. To keep remembering. To have the presence of mind to remember, oh yeah, metta, I have to remember that. I have to come back. And a number of people have been saying in reports, oh yeah, you know, my concentration's not really good because the mind just goes off sometimes. And when questioned, everybody I asked this actually in the last couple of days says, when I say, well, then what'd you do? Could you bring, could you recall, come back to the metta? And they say, oh yeah, it was easy. Etam satim aditya. That's exactly it. Just bringing the mind back. That's the practice. The coming back is more important than the going off because the mind will wander where it wants to. That's just its nature. And then the last line of that verse says, this is known as the sublime abiding here. Brahmam etam viharam idamahu. Sublime, divine. It speaks to that beautiful heart state where there is no dosa. It elevates us. It beautifies the heart, this practice. So I'm going to leave it here for tonight. Again, I've gone on too long, and I won't talk about the next verse until later. But I hope you come away with a sense of the coherence of this sutta. Because those first verses that we spoke about that aspect of the Eightfold Path that is sila, have been followed by what I've been talking about tonight, which is the bhavana part, the samadhi part. The panya part is the last verse, which is why I want to leave it for later, because it's very condensed. Sila, samadhi, panya, the whole of the Eightfold Path, right in here. So I really urge you to take this home, explore it yourself. Every time I look at it, I find it new little gifts to unwrap. And so I totally understand why it is such a revered sutta in the Buddhist world. So thank you for your kind attention. Let's sit quietly and let all these words fall away.